Every Night is Game Night, episode 61, the Solitaire Print and Play Contest for 2017. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Every Night is Game Night. This is Jason, your host. Thank you so much for joining us. We have another special episode, and the last of our guest host run next week will be the return of Anthony. If you are hungry for his insights, please go over to BoardGamersAnonymous.com and the Board Gamers Anonymous podcast. You will hear his content over there. He will be back next week, but in his place, we got, no question, the worst guest host I could possibly think of for this podcast. I'm kidding. He is the man. He is fractaloon Albert Hernandez. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me on.
He is the host of the One Player podcast and the guildmaster for the One Player Guild. So I'm being sarcastic. He's actually the best possible co-host I could have gotten.
Thank you. I'm happy being here.
Awesome. And we also have two special guests. We wanted to do a spotlight episode on a contest that many of you may not be too aware of if you're just getting into solo games. So this is the Solitaire Print and Play contest. This is a contest where I'm going to let them describe it in a little bit details in a second, but just to give you the very general strokes, it's a contest where a lot of amateur game designers can just take their hand and invent games, and they're going to submit them to a central authority, and they judge it. And it's a really great thing. So we're going to hear a little bit more about it. We invited the central authority himself, Chris Hansen, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Jason. It's good to be here.
And last but certainly not least, it is the designer of the winner of the Solitaire Print and Play contest. The game is Black Sonata. His name is John Kean. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right. That is a New Zealand accent you hear, which I think is awesome.
You'll hear a bit more of it later, I'm sure.
Okay, we are here to discuss a very kind of under the radar practice. We like to talk about the hotness here, of course, on Every Night is Game Night, but every once in a while we'd like to really dive in and get to the niches of the solitaire gaming world. And the print and play thing is a really cool thing that we wanted to highlight for you. So we want to definitely give some time to Chris to pitch the contest, pitch print and play in general. Let's start with print and play. So Chris, tell us about print and play.
So a print and play game, basically like any other game, except typically it's not going to come in a box or a bag. It's not going to be something you buy at the store. Most print and play games are available for free online. And the only caveat that comes with these free games is that you have to print them and assemble them yourself. That can mean cutting up cards, cutting up tiles, gluing components together. For a lot of people, that might not be something that they enjoy doing, but for a good chunk of people on the internet, there's a big print and play community online that I think enjoys the crafting side of the game almost as much as they enjoy playing the game. Like there can be something kind of relaxing and fun about just sitting and cutting up game components and seeing it come together under your hand as you do that building process. So that's basically a print and play game is just a game that you can get for free, but you have to build it yourself.
And there's a guild for that, right?
There is. There's a whole guild on Board Game Geek for print and play. I'm fairly active there as well. And you can find advice on how to build and advice on what kind of games to play, and just a good community of people that love that hobby.
Mm-hmm. Albert, are you a print and player?
Not as much as I used to be. I used to do a lot of them a while back, but then kids and work have slowed me down.
Mm-hmm. And John, I mean, you're the winner of the contest, and you actually have a couple of entries over the years. So, have you been a big print and play gamer over the years?
Yeah, for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's funny because you've been doing it for a couple of years. Albert did it for a little while and then dropped off. And Chris mentioned it as he was talking. It is a pain in the butt. to print and play a whole game, and depending on how complex it is. So you can just cut out a mat for a roll and write, cut something out and throw some dice and there you go. But then there's ones that get really intricate. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some tips and tricks to how to open that a barrier a little bit, welcome more people into this hobby so that they don't feel so intimidated by this whole thing.
Sure. I think there's definitely games that would be a better starting point than others. I mean, you probably don't want to pick a game that has 1,000 counters, for your first project or a lot of tiles. But there's a lot of print and play games that are very small and easy to craft, or that don't require any crafting at all. We have John on the podcast with us who designed the winning game, but the second place game in the contest this year is actually just a piece of paper that you roll dice and write. You're drawing fences to enclose bulls in a field. It's called Raging Bulls. And that print and play game is just print off a piece of paper and grab a pencil and some dice and start playing. So there's a whole range of complexity for getting started with finding the right game to get you into the hobby without overwhelming you with the number of pieces you have to craft. I think when you're ready to start crafting, though, one of the things I learned the hard way is, I think my first couple games, I just grabbed a pair of scissors and cut them up. And, it's hard, at least for me, to take scissors and cut nice straight lines. And so you get game components that don't look as nice, or, maybe that other people wouldn't want to play with you because it looks very homemade. So over the years, I've invested in a few tools, just cheap things like X-Acto knives and straight edges and a cutting board, which really have helped make the process a little bit smoother. And, having the right tools, obviously, for any job, but print and play included, can make it a lot more fun and give you a nicer result in the end.
Yeah, aside from the having the tools, those are really good examples, I think people are also intimidated by the cost of it. So do you need a special printer? Do you need special paper? Do you need all this kind of accoutrement in order to be able to effectively print and play? Do you feel like you can print? I know, John's games are pretty advanced. It takes a lot to kind of put together. We'll get to that in a second. But do you feel like you have to make that significant money investment in order to be a good print and player?
Not necessarily. I definitely go through a lot of cardstock paper, which is a little bit more expensive than regular. Which my wife also enjoys having that on hand because we print a lot of our own birthday cards, and it works very well for that as well. But we just pick that up at a store like Costco or Sam's Club, where you can get a big ream of it for cheap. Ink is definitely a cost issue. Some people like to print at a print shop like Kinko's or somewhere where you can just pay someone to print, and then you're not worrying about ink cartridges yourself. But I definitely go through a lot of ink, and that's probably one of the bigger cost factors, but I figure it's cheaper than buying as many games as it takes to go through a print cartridge. It's an investment, but it's cheaper than buying 20 new games, for example.
Cool. All right. Albert, do you have any opening things? So Albert, for listeners who don't know, Albert runs the One Player Guild, and he did 3 of these interviews. So he has 3 years of questions built up in the back of his head, just waiting to unleash on this call. So Albert, I'm going to give you free reign. Ask any question you want. Go for it.
Well, before asking any questions, I will say that the print and play is a hobby in itself, and you could put in a lot of effort into it, or you could keep it simple. And it really depends what you're looking for. If you just want to try out a lot of different games, you don't have to spend the time to craft something fancy and mount the board and print hundreds of cards and glue the backs to the fronts and all that. You could just print them out, play the game, and have fun with it, and then either file it away in a folder or throw it out if you just didn't want to keep it. Or you could play them online. A lot of games are available through Vassal modules. So you don't even have to print the print and play. And if you enjoy crafting, this is a great way to do it, because you could take a game, look at all the files, and say, it'd be really cool if I could mount this board a different way, or I want to tweak these cards a little bit and maybe retheme it or something. And that's a whole world of fun right there. Time-consuming and potentially expensive, but fun.
Well, I'll throw out a quick side note as well, that especially if I'm playing a game like for a contest where I'm trying to judge the quality of the game play and not necessarily have the nicest copy. So I need to build a lot of games quickly so I can play them before the contest deadline. I've got my copy of Black Sonata, the winning game, right here, and it's a really quick and dirty version. I didn't spend a lot of time on it or mount anything or make it very nicely. I intend to go back and print a much nicer copy of it, but just for playing it in the contest and getting a sense of the gameplay, I printed the low ink version that John made available, and Tried to save a little bit of money that way, and then didn't spend a whole lot of time on the crafting. I just made it workable, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of the games in my collection are kind of quick and dirty like that, and then the games that I've really enjoyed, I've gone back and made them really, really nice and spent the time to craft them nicely with mounted components and, trimmed edges on the cards, things like that.
Yeah, that's generally been my approach as well. And one of the coolest way to quickly and easily do a print and play game, especially if it's based around cards, is just to use some decent card sleeves. You can print a crappy copy on a bit of paper, cut it up with your scissors. It doesn't have to be nice and neat, because as soon as you slide them into those sleeves, you get a decent card out of it. So that's a really good way of doing them too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something with like a nice, like the clear front, but the solid back, so that you really don't have to see how awful your scissors are, because I'm like Chris, I can't cut a straight line to save my life. So, okay. And I know that a couple of listeners are going to ask, okay, give me a resource where I could just, look at some simple games or look at all that. We're going to save that towards the end. I'm sure as we close, we're going to have some suggestions on where to go to get yourself started, like really concrete ones. But before we do that, I wanted to get into this print and play contest. So now we know what print and playing is. Let's talk about this contest. So you've been running this for how long, Chris?
We just finished the 7th year. The 2017 contest was our 7th go at this.
Woo! So like I said, a lot of our listeners this is brand new to them. So give them the executive summary of what you wanted to accomplish and what you do.
Back in 2011, I saw several contests on BGG, and they were just informal. Someone threw together, like, let's make a contest where you can only use dice for your game. Or another person said, let's make a contest where you can only use, 4 components for your game. And I found myself, I would follow those contests and try to play games, but I would tend to stick to the games that were solo playable, just because it was hard for me to find someone who was willing to play contest games that required more than one player. I didn't have a lot of friends that were interested in that. So I'd follow these contests and just go with the solo games typically. And I thought it might be, fun to make a contest that, was focused on solitaire games. So I threw out the idea on Board Game Geek, basically saying, somebody should do this. And a few people replied and said, yeah, somebody should. And so I wasn't getting any volunteers. I actually got a ping early on from Jeremiah Lee, who designed a really famous print and play game called Zombie in My Pocket. It's a really popular one for first timers. It's super easy to make, and it's a fun game. And he pinged me and said, I might be willing to do it. And so I wrote to him and tried to get some ideas on how to get it started. And then he wrote back and said, I'm actually too busy. Why don't you do it? And I thought, well, why don't I do it? So that was kind of the start of the contest. It's just an interest in having that design contest. That I really enjoyed that fun community competitive thing, but just for focused on games that I would be able to play by myself.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So she fired it up in 2010, and it's grown ever since. I feel like it's been kind of this steady growth to the point where this year I'm looking at 50 different games that are finished. Like a lot of people will submit prototypes, but it won't kind of come to fruition. Like 50 different games were actually finished from 50 different designers, 16 of which were brand new this year. So you're always getting brand new people. You're always, it's great to have that healthy balance between people who have done it a couple times and people who are just like brand new, getting their feet wet. So John, when did you first design a game for the print and play? You said it was a couple years ago?
Yeah, my first game design was for the last year's 9-card challenge. So that's a similar kind of contest, but you're restricted to using only 9 cards. So it's essentially a single sheet of paper that you print and cut into 9 cards. And I thought, this can't be too bad. I'll come up with something here. So I had a go at that and produced my first game ever. And did okay in the contest. I think I got third equal or something overall, and that kind of fired the whole game designer spark that was lying latent inside me, I guess. And since then, I've pretty much constantly been obtaining a game in some contest or other on BGG since then.
Albert, did you, because I know you were interviewing Chris for a couple of times, did you notice that there was an overlap between the Princeton players and the people in the One Player Guild?
There was a lot, yeah. And I think, as a matter of fact, a lot of One Player Guild members learned about the contest because they had solo games and tried to participate in it and found out they loved the process and just have dived in full force. And that's really
Awesome.
neat to see that crossover.
Yep. Like I said, 50 games with 50 designers. And the contest itself, I mean, I don't know what yours is. You're crazy. 20, like the thread that you have, seriously, it's ridiculous. It's such a long thread on BGG, and every single category, like you have 22 different categories. You don't have to go through them all, but give us a sense for, what you're looking for in each different category, why you set them up the way you did.
Okay, well, one of the things you mentioned first was that there's a lot of new designers. And every year we probably get between 10 and 15, and I didn't even count this year, but you said 16 people who were brand new designers. This was their first time ever making a game. And I recognized that a few years ago and wanted to recognize these people because a lot of times someone who's brand new to designing, might not have a chance of winning the overall prize, but I still wanted them to be recognized for their efforts and, be able to have a prize that they could win by being the best of those new designers. So that was one example of one of the categories that I created. The others, as you say, there's 22, which is probably too many. But every time I try to cut one, because I don't run this, like a dictatorship at all. I try to throw out ideas to the community and say, what if we only did these categories and cut out these 3 or something? And those 3 are somebody's favorite categories. Like it's hard for me to make these cuts because somebody's like, no, that's my favorite. So it's gotten a little bloated because of that. But similar to that new designer thing, people suggested, like, what if we rewarded the best use of certain mechanics? So we have a category for push your luck game or area control game or a paragraph style game like Ambush or the Doctor Who Solitaire story game, things like that, where you're following along with paragraphs, choose your own adventure style. There's those kind of games. We also look for the best war game. And that one is just a personal favorite of mine. There's a whole separate contest dedicated to war games, but I really enjoy seeing a few war games in the solitaire contest, so I've always kept that category. But all of those categories just kind of came about because somebody wanted them or somebody thought they'd be cool, and I'm too nice to cut any of them, I guess.
Benevolent dictatorship.
I've got to trim them back. It's getting unruly, but it's a lot of fun.
It seems like some years you'd have a game that showed up that just didn't fit in any category at all, and you're like, I kind of need a new category just for this game. Yeah. And then that spawns more games of that type.
Well, and then one year, for example, I created the paragraph category because we had, 3 or 4 games that qualified, and so they wanted to be able to compete. So I created that category, and it did great that year. And the next year I created that category again, and there were no games that fit that description at all. So it can be kind of hard to guess what's going to come out from year to year.
Yeah, there's a ton of different stuff. Like, I can't, listeners who are wondering what the heck we're talking about, there is so much different stuff that you can do. Like you mentioned before, worker placement, area control, roll and write, storytelling. Like there was a little, solo, I think it was a storybook, it was like a deck adventure game. I forget exactly what it's called, but it was like amazing. I was like, wow, I'm going to print this out. So I like narrative and story. So, I mean, there's something for everybody in one of these things. And, we're not saying these are the greatest games in the world. They have to go out and print every single one of them right now. But if you're looking for something different, like we always hear, give me something beyond the hotness. Give me something that's a hidden gem. Like this is the definition. That's, they're not on publishers' radars, and they're just people that are creative that are doing their thing. So actually, what do people win in each particular category, and then going towards the best game?
So there really isn't a lot of the rules on Board Game Geek will prohibit you from giving cash prizes or things like that. So we just give Geek Gold, which is the Board Game Geek site currency. You can use it to buy micro badges, and I guess you could use it to bid. They have auctions sometimes where you can bid on games, and you could actually win with Geek Gold to win a free board game. But really, it's not a valuable, there's no real cash value to Geek Gold. It's just a prize for fun. If you win a lot of Geek Gold, you can go buy a lot of micro badges on the site or get yourself a nice avatar or something. But if you already have all that, it's just kind of a nice to have. Really, I think the contest is more fun just to be participating in it, and winning it is nice. It's a nice feather in your cap, but it's not like you walk away with $1,000 or something. It's just participating for the fun of it.
And to appear on famous podcasts.
Indeed, yes.
The other thing, from the perspective of a designer, you get out of the contest is a captive audience who are willing to play test your game and try it out and give you more suggestions and drive that creativity forward. And the contests are a fantastic way of getting that feedback because of the short time frame and the community that builds around it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you talk with Morten Monrad Pedersen, like he interviewed a bunch of the people who are in the contest, and I think he asked you like what's the worst piece of feedback, or what was the thing that really challenged you, and you were like, I loved it all.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes when you're close to something, you've created something, you don't have the objectivity to know if it's good or not, and so you do need some feedback to know where you stand. And so I welcome any kind of feedback, good or bad, because it just grounds me and lets me know where I am and what the way forward will be.
Okay, so let's get into talking about Black Sonata, which is the winner. It won in a whole bunch of categories, including Best Advanced Build. So if you're looking to just jump in the deep end of the pool and print this out, then beware. It's a little bit of a task in order to craft this game. But it sounds really, really interesting. So maybe you can give us a little bit about, what the game is and did you accomplish what you wanted to do with it?
Yeah, I think the results from the suggest that I definitely did achieve what I set out to do. But what I set out to do was I wanted a real challenge. I wanted to do something that no one had done before, and I wanted to try and do something that a lot of people thought might be impossible. And I didn't even know if it was possible myself when I set out. I wanted to make a deduction game that truly used logical deduction, not just sort of elimination of, like in Cluedo, or I think you Americans call it Clue, where you gradually tick off the suspects until only one is left and only one murder weapon is left, therefore it must be the one. I wanted something more than that, more like a not quite to the extent of Sherlock Holmes consulting detective kind of deduction, but more like Mastermind, where you have a series of hidden pegs and you've got to figure out what colour they are by getting clues that you've got one right but in the wrong place, that kind of thing. But I wanted to have a story behind it, and I wanted it to be replayable, and I wanted it solitaire, obviously, for the contest. So it was a challenge that I didn't know if I could achieve it or not, but I decided I'd have a go. And the great thing about BGG is that you put some ideas out and you get some feedback, and it helps to shape those ideas, and you can try lots of different possibilities, and gradually things started coming together with this game for me. So yeah, the game as it turned out, two parts to it. One is the pure sort of deduction type thing, and that is trying to figure out who the Dark Lady is. I guess I can talk about the theme later. So you're trying to figure out who this Dark Lady is, and that's based on pure deduction from clues from some cards. And so that came along first, and that seemed to be working quite well. But then I was like, so how are we going to gather these clues? And so I had to come up with the second part of the game around that. And I tried a few things, and the things that I thought would work didn't. Usually the case. And then the thing that I thought was probably impossible turned out to working, and that is a solitaire hidden movement mechanism. So as far as I'm aware, it's the only one out there, the only game where you have a hidden movement mechanism for a solitaire game. And
yeah, that's really neat. You did that with like a deck of cards. It's hard to describe. Like it's a deck of cards, but then each deck kind of points to a certain place, and it's one of 3 symbols, I think, and then you have to kind of match up and follow what's going on.
Yeah, so the way I think about it is the Dark Lady is travelling around these locations, and it's set in Shakespeare's London about the year 1600. So there are 11 locations in the city there on the map, on the board, and each location has certain features, like some of them are next to the Thames River, some of them have playhouses, some of them have Shakespeare's residences, some of them have financial sort of shopping areas and that kind of thing. And so as the Dark Lady moves around, set by this deck of cards, you're given a clue for one of the things that she can see in her current location, and you won't know exactly which location that is, because these things appear in several different locations. But as she moves around, you can build up a picture and start to eliminate which connections are possible. And so those clues build up until you can figure out where she actually is on the map. And then, of course, you have to race and try and intercept her and catch a clue from her.
Yeah, I love the flow of the game. So like you gather this information and you try to finally corner her, and then when you corner her, you don't like catch her, you just get a clue about her, and you have I think there's like a separate sheet that has all the different possibilities for the Dark Lady, but she runs away.
Yeah. And
or like the game kind of resets a little bit, so it's almost like a movie.
Yeah, she runs further and faster the more clues you have as well, so it gets hard.
That is really cool. Chris, when you first got that game, was it? I mean, you play so many of these games that this kind of like scratch a different itch for you? It was like, wow, I haven't seen this before.
Well, to be honest, one of the things I do in the contest is I try to focus a lot on the games that aren't getting as much attention, because I want everybody to be getting feedback, and so I tried to play these games that didn't have as many people playing them. And so Black Sonata was one that I got to much later, because it was pretty popular and he was getting a lot of feedback from other users. So I didn't play it until right before the end. So I was not one of the early adopters to it. But when I played it for the first time, honestly, my thought was, how in the hell did he do this? Like that movement track and trying to determine, like I could map out using the cards, the order that she was going in, and move into a place where I could intercept her, and then she completely wasn't there. You identify if she's there through these secret cards that can kind of reveal if she's there or not. And like I just felt like you've done this huge math problem or something to put this together. I thought it was a really amazing game, and definitely very worthy of its win.
Thank you. Yeah, I must admit there is quite a sizable spreadsheet in the game. So yeah.
Do you ever think, because this isn't your first rodeo, I mean, obviously this is a very ambitious game, but you have other things in your catalog. Would you ever seek out being published or getting the attention of some, like a small publisher or, something like that?
I guess it would be kind of fun to see something that you created on the shelves in the game shop, but it's not really why I'm doing this. I'm doing it as a sort of a personal challenge and a creative challenge, and I'm teaching myself new skills each time. Like I'm trying to learn graphic design and illustration and everything as I go, and the game contests provide a platform for developing my skills in those areas, and so I'm enjoying that part of it. I'm enjoying the interaction with the community and the feedback and giving feedback on other people's games, and like Chris said, saying, wow, in that game and getting new ideas. And the great thing about the PnP world is that you're not restricted to dies and templates and what machines are out there for mass producing games. You can use whatever you like. In the contest, for example, this year there was a game that consisted entirely of you ripping up bits of paper, and that's something that's right out there, and it's fascinating. And it just opens up this whole world of possibility.
Awesome. So, thank you so much for, talking about the contest, talking about the winning game and all that kind of stuff. I'd like to end by asking you guys, what are your favorite, print and play games, almost evergreen type titles? Utopia Engine is one that keeps on coming up over and over. You'll get asked in the guild, what's a good one? They'll point to that one. Or a Todd Sanders game, because Todd Sanders is, he was in the contest this year, and, so Mr. Cabbahead's Garden game or something just like that. So, for all three of you, do you guys have any, games that leap to mind that, you guys have to check these games out?
One game that comes to mind, which is a really old one, not necessarily because of the creative mechanics, but because the love the person obviously put into it. I think it was called Tailspin, the card game. And if you remember back in Disney Afternoon years ago, there's a Tailspin cartoon. The whole game is based on that. Of course. And the game just looks so fantastic. And he borrowed artwork from the cartoon and all the shows. And it's just amazing. What a neat game. And it just, people that craft, print, or create the games put a lot of love into these, and that's what makes them so special.
I probably have a big list. You mentioned Todd Sanders. He's one of my favorites. A lot of his games will be instant prints for me. Although his games now, he's become popular enough, he's released a few print and play games and then pulled them a week later, said, sorry, it just got published. So that's the risk, I guess, is download quickly when you see these things. But I love his series, The Shadows Upon Lassiter. There's 7 games in that series right now. I haven't played the most recent one yet, but I've enjoyed that whole series. The first one was one of the games that was released in the first contest back in 2011. I really, really love that game, and I'll play a lot of his stuff. You mentioned Utopia Engine. That one comes out pretty often for me, as well, by the same designer, who's Nick Hayes. I love his Jasper and Zot. That's a terrific game. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times for my favorite solitaire games, typically the games that win the contest or come into the first 2 or 3 spots oftentimes become games that are on my long-term shelf. I'm not just saying this because John's online, but I can see Black Sonata being one that I'm still playing, a year or 2 from now and still enjoying and discovering new things and getting better at it. It's pretty easy to lose this game. It's a challenge and I want to get better at it. So I can see that being one that I keep playing for a long time.
Cool. Actually, the first print and play game that really grabbed me was Agent Decker, which was from one of Chris's contests a couple of years ago. It's been developed into a commercial game now called Super Hot or something. I haven't actually...
Yes, Super Hot.
Yeah. So the precursor to that, Agent Decker, it's a lovely little deck building game, and that was my first introduction to deck building, and it's still one of my favorite games. The other one that I think is a real classic is one called Marquis, where it's set in wartime France in a village, and you play the resistance, and it's a sort of a worker placement game, very replayable because there are different scenarios, very cool art, and very enjoyable and challenging game. And one of my new favorites is actually from the same contest that we've been talking about, and it's called Snowbirds. And it's a really it's sort of at the same time I'm an ecologist and by trade, and so this game is about the migration of geese, and it's just beautifully done. There's lovely art. It's a simple game with cards and a dice, and it just plays really nicely. And it's just got a slightly different pace from the sort of dungeon crawl and save the world kind of things that a lot of board games are about. So I really enjoy that one as well.
You mentioned McKee. I think that's it. That was a really underrated app. It skipped straight. I don't think they ever printed that game, like official distribution, all that, but it's a really solid app. And I got a lot of play out of it, and then I realized I was really crappy at it, and then I moved on to something I was better at.
I think that game, that game actually won the Solitaire Print and Play contest in 2015, I want to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, these games are too hard. Give me some slam dunks over here. So, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. I mean, is there any other, I'll leave the last word to you guys, to Albert and to Chris and to John. What do you guys want to say about Print and Play, about, the community, where are some good resources? Where can we find you? All that good stuff.
Well, my first discovery of modern board games and Print and Play came from stumbling on a website called goodlittlegames.com, I think it is. And so Google Good Little Games. It's a good place to start. All the games there are, I think, 18 cards. So that's 2 sheets of paper to print. They're well-designed games. There's a whole range of different ones. They're all on Board Game Geek as well, but they're presented really nicely there, and it's a good place to get an introduction, I think.
So I would invite anyone that's new to Print and Play games or that has an interest in designing the solitaire contest that we run, the Print and Play community in general is just one of the friendliest places that I've ever found on the internet. It is such a good place to get feedback. I've often seen, like, if somebody releases a game and just says, hey, I've got a new Print and Play game out, it can kind of languish unnoticed, unfairly so, but this contest provides a structure where you get a lot of people playing your game and providing feedback. So I'd invite anybody that has any interest in that to come and participate. We'll definitely be doing this next year. The contest typically runs in the summer and late fall. So I'd invite anyone to come and participate. And one other plug for another contest, maybe not as relevant, but for those who have children, I also run a contest that's going on right now, the Children's Board Game Design Contest. It's also free Print and Play games. Not quite as big of an event as the Solitaire contest has turned into, but still a lot of fun and some really great designers and great people over there. So I just encourage people to come and get involved and at the very least try out some of these games. There are just absolutely amazing games, and I can honestly say I think some of the games in the contest from this year and prior years really rival things that I've gone out and paid money for sometimes. There's a lot of high quality stuff out there. So if you're looking for the unknown gem, I've got a list of 50 that you can start digging through right now.
John, go ahead and give a little pub for the 2-player contest.
Oh, well, so you've heard all about the 1-player. The 2-player contest is the equivalent of that, obviously, for 2 players. So I've taken over that from previous people who started it and continued on. So I think it was the 4th year this year for that one. We generally kick off the contest about Valentine's, and I think that's quite appropriate for a 2-player contest. And we generally have a category for best game to play with your loved spouse or girlfriend kind of thing. So there's not that much more to say about it. We had about 50 games, again, similar to the Solitaire one, but probably not quite as much hype and energy around the contest as there is around the Solitaire one. Obviously, because it's harder to find a second person to play and try out the games with than it is to do play a Solitaire one. So
Awesome. And Albert, tell us all about the stuff you're doing on the One Player Guild and the One Player Podcast, which maybe a couple of people haven't heard of.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't been to the Board Game Geeks One Player Guild, you should definitely come check it out. There's about almost 8,000 other people there that all love solitaire war games. Very friendly place. Great resource if you just want to chat about games or about anything else, honestly. And come listen to the One Player Podcast, right? The show on solitaire board games, as I say in the intro. It's yet another resource for the solo gamer.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, Jason.
Thank you.
And that's going to go ahead and do it for another episode of Every Night is Game Night. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'd like to thank Albert from One Player Guild for hopping by. We'd like to thank Chris and John, especially John, for joining us halfway around the world right during the middle of his workday in New Zealand. We apologize if there were any audio hiccups there. We hope that he came in clear enough where we could hear about what he's talking about. Black Sonata really is a fun game. We encourage you to check that out. Please reach out to us via social media. We are all over the Twitter, ENGN_podcast, Facebook, at the Board Gamers Anonymous page. everynightisgamenight.com is our website. And also, I'm going to ask for this every single time. Please go to the different places where you can rate podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and especially the iTunes Store, and give us a rating. The more ratings we get, the more we float to the top of the chart so that people can find the podcast and join in on the solitaire gaming fun. Tom Vassal has joined us, so if he joined us, then every single gamer out there should be welcome to join us as well. So that's it. This is Jason signing off. Until next week, grab a solo game off the shelf and let's make every night a game night.